As we start diving into looking at various topics within the syllabus of Class 10 Mathematics, we should have a few sort of frameworks or ideas before we actually get into a topic. And one of them is the following, that let's try and break down the topic in as many ways that we possibly can. And one of the advantages of that is that if you've broken up a larger problem into smaller constituent parts, then it's sometimes easier to identify which are the parts that we understand and which are the parts, for example, that we don't understand or we are having some difficulty in understanding. Now, when we're looking at commercial mathematics, and within commercial mathematics, if you're looking at goods and services tax, so here's one way of breaking up that particular concept of goods and services tax, to say what are the sort of mathematical components associated with goods and services tax, and what are the non-mathematical components associated with goods and services tax. Now, what we mean by that is the following. So let's take it through an example. So the example is that I'm a consumer, I go and buy a product, let's say for 1,000 rupees, and there's an 18% tax. So then the amount that I pay is 1,000 times 18 divided by 100. That's the amount of tax that I will pay. That's 18% of 1,000 rupees. So that's 180 rupees. So if you look at the mathematical components within that, it's essentially just multiplication and fractions. So if you ask what, in the example that we've given, what are the mathematical aspects of that particular transaction, then it's essentially just multiplication and fractions. So as long as you're comfortable with multiplication and fractions, you're comfortable with the mathematical aspects of that particular problem. Now let's look at the non-mathematical aspects. Now, the various players or the various entities that are there within this transaction is number one, the consumer, number two, the merchant, and number three, the government. So there are various transactions that happen between these various entities. That is, the consumer is paying the price plus the tax. The merchant is receiving the price plus the tax, and the government is receiving the tax, right? So essentially there are three players or three entities in this transaction where you have the merchant, the consumer, and the government. So those are the non-mathematical aspects, but we need to keep track of who is paying whom how much and who's receiving how much. So in a sense, we've broken up the problem into two bits, the mathematical bits, which is multiplication and fractions, and the non-mathematical bits, which is identifying the various entities and establishing the various transactions that happen between them. So what we'll do is, through the various topics that we cover, we'll try to the extent possible to actually decompose the sort of larger problem into smaller constituent parts, and that hopefully will give us more confidence in identifying what we understand and perhaps where we need to work a little bit more.